Welcome, this is Portia Hoeg with Athletic Director U. I'm happy today to be with Beth Goetz, Athletic Director at Ball State, and Joe Karlgaard, Athletic Director at Rice University. We'll be discussing self-management. Thank you two for joining us today.
Thank you.
So you've both been in the athletic director role for two varying amounts of time. Joe, 11 years, Beth, 7 months. Let's say we start over tomorrow, hit the reset button, and you become athletic director again. What would you change about your position, how you start off in the position versus how you did the first go around?
Well, I've been athletics director at two different places, and the one was a Division III school and now at Rice, and I think that if I had to start over at Rice again, I'd take the advice of my college track coach, Vin Lanana, who I worked for him for a couple of years after I finished running, and he said, you always ask the next question. Always think about what the next question is. So when you're finished asking somebody questions, think, well, what haven't I asked that I should know? And I think if I'd done that maybe a little more deeply as I started at Rice, I would have been able to diagnose some problems a bit more quickly. And eventually I found out all of that information, but I probably could have been more proactive on it by asking the next question.
Absolutely. And Beth, in your experience?
Yeah, I'm sure I'm adding to that list since I'm just getting started. But I think one of the things I know right away, just the timing when I started in the summer, and it was harder to connect with donors personally than I thought, and I sort of let everybody else sort of try and arrange these meetings while they were on vacation. I think that being able to sit face to face with individuals a little bit more quickly than I did the first time around would certainly be something that I'd be focused on.
Absolutely. So transitioning a little bit to your leadership style, and as you reflect on who you truly are, and then along the lines of that, if we were to talk to people who've known you for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years even, does that same style still resonate today? Beth?
I think it does. I think some of the things that people that know me personally and professionally probably would say are pretty stable characteristics. Some good and some bad. So I know I'm pretty steady in general, and that can be a great thing in a crisis. It also makes you hard to read. And you know that from a management standpoint, that can be a challenge from your employees. But I've always loved being a part of a team. And as you know, when you're an athlete, you try and operate from a sense of, hey, how can we be collaborative? How can we really work together? And I've been able to, I think, continue to ingrain that in any role I've had.
I'd say I've probably done a bit more maturing over the course of 20 years, if you want to go back that far. And I'm not sure I would have taken the same approach at 24 as I do at 44. So, but if you go back 5 years or so, I think my style now is to try and get to the right answer and not be concerned about who has that answer. It could come from a brand new employee fresh out of college, or it could come from an industry vet of 30 years. And you do that by communicating, by trying to bring groups of people together, maybe people who have different points of view, and you talk it through. And I think we've done a better job of that later in my 11 years as an AD than I did maybe earlier in my time.
Mm-hmm. So as athletic directors, we all know that the day can get quite chaotic, whether planned or unplanned. As you manage the day-to-day on the operations of the athletic department, do you have a quiet space, a place of zen to help you regroup and come back to any issues harder and better than ever with a clear head? Joe?
Well, I try to run every day in the middle of the day, and I strategically put that in the middle of my day so that I've had a chance to kind of assess what's going on that day, and I have a chance to recharge and think through solutions to problems or think through new ideas while I'm out on my run. So my fortress of solitude is around the path that encircles the Rice campus for 45 minutes every day.
Yeah, so saying this next to a runner, that is also my outlet, but I would say I jog more than run these days. But I don't know if I've ever come to any sort of consensus or conclusion or direction that hasn't been when I'm out on a jog. So I haven't figured out how to do that in the middle of the day yet. I think my shower time probably takes a little bit longer to get back in, but that's really important for me to get that time to think things through when your feet are hitting the pavement.
Right. So when you're not running or jogging, when do you take the time to process information that comes your way in all directions?
I just finished reading the book When by Daniel Pink, and he sort of encourages you to think about whether or not you're a morning person or a night owl or something in between, and then try to organize your day around that. So I try to do more of my creative thinking in the afternoon and more of my my problem solving, collaborative problem solving in the morning. And I'd probably say the bookends of my days are when I do the most assessment, either in the morning when I'm in the shower or getting ready for work or dropping my kids off to school, or at the end of the day when I'm unwinding.
Yeah, I think it varies based on what your schedule is. I mean, I love being in the office early when it's still quiet and everybody's still trickling in, and you have a chance to sort of get your thoughts and plans for what you're going to tackle together. So that's usually where I try to spend that time.
Sure. So I imagine that you have a thought partner or someone or some people out there that you can call on in times of running ideas by, or maybe you just need to vent. Who are those people, and how did you go about selecting them, or did they select you, Beth?
Yeah, I think we've all been really fortunate in this industry to build relationships, and some that are more personal and have lasted longer, or sometimes it's just the camaraderie that exists, I think, in the industry to say, hey, you may not be somebody you connect with regularly, but I think if I called Joe to ask for advice, I have, you have no doubt that they're going to give you the time that you need to do that. So there's certainly people that I lean on who I have had an opportunity to get to know through my path to this point. And so you reach out to them when you need another ear or need to figure out if you're on the right path.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Well, I've got somebody on my team, Rick Mello, who is an athletics director at Arkansas Little Rock and at FIU, and he's my deputy AD. So Rick's an industry vet of close to 40 years, and so he's been through a lot. I can always test ideas with him. It's almost like I've got a rope around my waist, tie the other end to his waist, and then I can go and wander around, and then if I get too far out of bounds, he just tugs me back. So that's kind of a good internal thought partner. And then externally, my college coach, who I mentioned earlier, Vin Lanana, and then Bob Bowlesby, who I worked for at Stanford, is somebody that if it's a real macro problem, he's always somebody who will give me his ear.
That's fantastic to have, and I think not only to speak to them, but also someone that's going to be honest and rein you in, like you said, with the rope or not, is also very helpful in your day-to-day. As you manage those operations, what employee traits or behaviors really trigger you and maybe even impact your own self-care? How do you go about thinking those through and eventually coming to some sort of solution and managing those?
I think the biggest challenge in managing any employee, whether they're a administrative staff member or a coach, is somebody who points fingers, who won't accept responsibility, or who won't admit to mistakes. And I think, we try to, as a department and in trying to build our culture, we want people to be able to be vulnerable and freely admit the mistakes, because we're an educational institution, and that just doesn't apply to the students, it applies to everybody. And I often ask a coach, if they're 40, I'll say, are you the coach that you want to be when you're 50? And usually the answer is no. And so then, what's the path that we're going to put you on to get you where you want to be when you're 50? And I think a lot of that has to do with recognizing where your shortcomings are and where your where some of your issues lie, and then being proactive in addressing those.
Absolutely. Okay.
Yeah, I think for me it's really about everybody's willingness to be open-minded. And I think the exercise of whether you're really evaluating a potential change or just verifying a process that you go through, even if you ultimately decide to continue on the same path, I think you want everybody to be open to that thought process. I mean, you just because it was a right decision, 6 months ago, is it the right decision today? And so wanting to have everybody have the confidence to say, hey, yeah, let's look at what we're doing now. It's not a personal attack. It doesn't mean we were down the wrong direction, but are we willing to go through that exercise to either confirm that what we're doing is right, or that there may be another path we should take at this point.
Right. And along those same lines, how do you deal with we've always done it this way? I feel like that's the dreaded phrase with the department. How do you bring others on board in a way that makes them feel valued and part of that process?
Yeah, I think we all are guilty of that ourselves sometimes, and so you understand if, particularly when you've had positive results from something, that you may be really tied to, hey, we shouldn't veer here or there. But I think if you create an environment that says, hey, it's okay to look at things differently. It's all right to try something new and to fail, and sometimes that's really going to move us even faster in the direction that you want to go. So again, I think it's just about asking them to take ownership of all the good things that have come from a particular decision or way they've always done it, but to say, hey, how can we make it even better? Or to Joe's point, you've been a great coach for the first 40 years, and so what do you do for the next 10? So how do you move that needle?
Absolutely. Would you have anything to add to that, Joe?
Yeah, I think you have to preserve your values, and so whatever the institutional values are, the athletic department values, those really should not change. I think everything else is fair game, and I think that's part of life. Life is about change and how you adapt to change, and so we have to. This is part of culture building. You want to build a culture where people accept that we are going to evolve, and there never is going to be an endpoint to that.
Absolutely. This is Portia Hoeg with Athletic Director U. We're talking about self-management with Ball State Athletic Director Beth Goetz and Athletic Director Joe Karlgaard at Rice University. Is there an aspect of your role that you probably should delegate, but because it's close to your heart or it's close to your skill set, you haven't yet delegated that?
I have a difficult time delegating anything on the academic side. Now, we've got a kind of a separate structure where our academic advisors are housed in the dean's office and have kind of a dotted line relationship to our staff and our coaches. But when it comes to how do we improve graduation rates, how do we reduce transfers, what's our relationship like with the admissions office? I think with my background, and I have a degree in higher education, so I really want to be involved in that. I also think that at a place like Rice is going to be very, very important, and that's not something I'm necessarily willing to step back from. And it's probably not as educational for my staff when they're not as involved in that, so that if there was something that I probably should push off a little more, it'd be anything on the academic side.
Absolutely. And then Beth, have you gotten there yet?
Yeah, it'll probably take a little bit longer, but compliance is probably that for me, and I spent some time in compliance at one point, and so certainly I think you want to be engaged and have an awareness if something's not going right, or if you've got some risk areas. But even beyond that, I think my time in that area really informed the bigger picture, and so I want to know what the upcoming proposals are and have a chance to sit down and go through that with staff. And I think it really gives me a handle on what the recruiting landscape looks like in a particular sport if I have at least some knowledge that in theory is a little bit more in the weeds. So I probably need to find the right balance.
Sure. So with that balance, knowing that you have professional staff that are looking to gain experience, how do you include them? I mean, still having management over that area because of institutional philosophy, or maybe it's even perception, or it's your own passion or experience. How do you engage them in those areas? Are there any creative ideas you've employed or templates that you can share with our viewers?
You know, I've worked for a couple athletic directors like this, and one in particular, and David Benedict, that's at UConn, who just really went out of his way to make sure that I had every opportunity to be involved, even peripherally, on conversations that you really wouldn't be until you're in the chair. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes it's as simple as you're taking a call with the commissioner, and somebody else is in the room for that. So it's, can you creatively find ways to expose them to conversations that you may not be thinking, hey, this is a big deal, but you've now heard somebody else go through that, negotiating contracts with an agent, those different types of activities. And I think you can be really intentional about giving people an opportunity to join you when appropriate.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would completely agree with everything Beth said. I think that's the best way to do it. I think it's also a great way to do it when you're early in your career. And this is how I try to go out and recruit employees, is say, look, you're not going to come work for an industry vet who knows everything, but I will include you in so many of the conversations and so many of the decisions, because I need your knowledge base to do what's best for Rice. And so you may not get that connection that you want with a Bob Bowlesby or a Jeremy Foley or a Gene Smith, but on the other hand, you're going to be knee-deep in so many of the different decisions that we make, and that's, in the long run, going to make you better if you aspire to be an AD yourself.
Absolutely. And one of the things I know I experienced as an athletic director is trying to maintain that connection with student athletes. And Beth and I, we were discussing a little bit earlier, talk about the places that place you escape to find a moment of peace, or to make sure you're still engaged with your constituency group.
Yeah, I mean, that's always easy. It's going to be in the gym with SAC or at a competition. And so I try to actually build that into your calendar, because sometimes it's harder to get there than you think. So I'll actually plug in practice so I know I can get to see different teams and to interact with them on their turf. And I think that's really important to keep that connectivity. And it's what I enjoy the most about the role, is the engagement that you have with those young men and women.
Right. And Joe, have you been able to do so as well?
Practice is great. I heard this within the last year that Jack Swarbrick actually does what you do, Beth. He schedules practice every afternoon, and I think that's valuable. It's something I've started to do within the last year to make sure that I can get out and see different teams practice. The ones that practice at 5:30 in the morning, I'm not so keen on, but I try to do that. And I think, you know, it's just that constant recentering that you need from time to time when the decision that you make and the inbound communications are so overwhelming. You've got to get back to that point and remember why you're here and who you're doing it for, and practice is a great way to do that.
Absolutely. And so bringing it back to self-management, and for our viewership of current or aspiring athletic directors, what advice would you provide to them specific to self-management and self-care?
Well, I think the number one characteristic that's going to serve you into the future as an aspiring administrator, coach, or athletic director is authenticity. You have to be yourself, whoever that is. There are lots of different people working in college athletics with different personalities and different backgrounds, and that's part of what makes it so fun. But, you know, don't try to be, you know, if you see me or you see Beth or you see Portia or, you know, you see Chris Delcani, if you're not that person, don't try to be that person. Be the best version of yourself. And then I'd also say, make sure that you take time for yourself every day. And, you know, that may be a couple of minutes or it may be an hour, and it's up to you to decide how you do that. But I think it's very important that you consistently do that over time, so that you don't reach a point before you ever get a chance to be an AD where you're burned out.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, that's really well said. So the only thing I would probably add is I think you've got to give yourself permission to and hold yourself accountable to reevaluating how you manage different situations. So, if I'm fortunate enough to be an AD as long as Joe has, I hope I'm not the same AD I am today. And so, just like you'd want your staff to do, to really say, hey, how did I manage that? And not be afraid to ask a staff member that may have been involved in those conversations. Are there things that you see I could have done differently? And so I think that self-evaluation piece is really critical if you want the opportunity to continue to grow yourself.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for your expertise and sharing with us today on self-management. This is Portia Hoeg with Athletic Director U, discussing self-management with Athletic Director Beth Goetz from Ball State and Joe Karlgaard from Rice University. Thank you for joining us.